The war room smelled of old parchment and older regrets. Alpha King Marcus Thornhaven stood alone in the pre-dawn darkness, his fingers tracing the borders of his kingdom on maps that had outlived the men who drew them. 32 years old, 8 years on the throne, a lifetime of carrying weight that never grew lighter. The candles guttered in their sconces, casting shadows that danced like memories across the stone walls. Beyond the narrow windows, his capital city still slept, wrapped in that fragile peace he had purchased through careful diplomacy and careful distance from everything that made a man fully alive. His father would have called it weakness. His father had called many things weakness before a Valdarian blade had proven that even the strongest kings could bleed. Marcus pressed his palms flat against the table, feeling the grain of wood worn smooth by generations of royal hands. The northern border mocked him with its clean lines and false certainty. Reality was messier than cartography. Reality was 3,000 Valdarian soldiers massing at Thorn Pass, their campfires visible from the watchtowers like a constellation of hostile stars promising violence. 10 days. That was the estimate from his scouts. Duke Stefan Valdarian had accelerated his timeline, pushing his forces faster than winter conditions should have allowed. 10 days before the invasion, unless something changed the tactical situation. The memory came unbidden, as it always did in these solitary hours. He was 12 years old again, standing in this same room while his father bent over these same maps with hands stained red from an afternoon execution. King Roland Thornhaven had ruled through fear so absolute that even his son had learned to hide every tremor, every doubt, every flicker of the compassion that Roland believed would get them all killed. A king who feels is a king who bleeds. His father's voice, rough as granite, hard as winter. Mercy is weakness, love is poison. The crown demands everything, Marcus. Everything. Until there is nothing left of the boy you were, only the weapon you must become. Marcus had watched his father die when he was 24, gut wound from a border skirmish turning septic over 3 agonizing days. Even then, bleeding out and fever-mad, Roland had refused to show pain, refused to weep, refused to tell his only son anything softer than orders about succession and the terrible inheritance of a kingdom that respected only strength. "Be strong!" his father had gasped, through teeth clenched against screaming. "Never let them see weakness. Never love anything more than the crown." And young Marcus, holding his father's hand as life drained away, had felt tears on his face and known himself a failure before his reign had even begun. 8 years later, the tears had stopped. He had proven himself through patient negotiation rather than his father's brutal preemptive strikes, keeping peace while the nobles whispered that he was not his father's son, as if that were an insult rather than the only compliment that mattered. Competent and controlled and utterly, devastatingly alone. The door opened without warning. Marcus straightened, muscle memory transforming vulnerability into the mask of kingship in the space of a heartbeat. But it was only General Roderick Stoneheart, the grizzled veteran who had taught Marcus strategy when Roland had been too busy teaching him ruthlessness. "Nothing good happens at this hour, Your Majesty." Roderick's voice carried the weight of 50 years and 100 campaigns. "Intelligence just arrived from the northern outposts." Marcus gestured to the maps. "Show me." The general moved with the careful precision of a man whose body remembered every wound it had survived. He placed a sealed document on the table between them, the wax stamped with the mark of the Master of Whispers. "Decoded intercept from Valdarian Command. They have accelerated their schedule. The invasion comes within 10 days, possibly sooner. 3,000 heavy infantry, 500 cavalry, siege equipment for the border fortresses." The words settled into Marcus's chest like stones. His father would have already been mounted and riding north, gathering the army for a preemptive strike that would leave the Valdarian forces scattered and broken before they could coordinate their assault. Marcus studied the map instead, his mind moving through possibilities the way Roderick had taught him. What is their objective? Simple territorial gain? Real. Roderick hesitated, and that hesitation told Marcus more than words could. "There is more, Your Majesty. The intercepts suggest coordination with elements inside our own borders. They expect the border garrisons to be undermanned when they strike." Sabotage. The word tasted like betrayal. Someone in his own kingdom, someone with access to military deployments and garrison schedules, was working with the enemy that had killed his father. Do we know who? Not yet, but I have someone investigating, someone outside the normal channels, someone the conspirators will not expect. Marcus looked up sharply. You have been running independent intelligence operations without informing your king? Roderick met his gaze without flinching. I have been protecting my king from threats he is too noble to anticipate. Your father trusted no one. You trust everyone. I am attempting to find the balance that keeps you alive. The reproach stung because it carried truth. Marcus had spent years trying to be everything his father was not, and in the process had perhaps forgotten that some of Roland's paranoia had been earned through bitter experience. Who is your operative? Lady Elena Ashford. Roderick said the name carefully, watching for reaction. Her father was Master of Whispers before his death 3 years ago. He trained her in cryptography, intelligence analysis, information gathering. She has been working in the archives, officially cataloging historical documents, actually monitoring communication patterns, and decoding suspicious correspondence. Marcus knew the name, though he could not immediately summon a face. The Ashfords were minor nobility, barely above the merchant class. Their holdings small, and their influence smaller. A daughter working as an archivist was unremarkable, the kind of person who moved through the castle unseen, exactly the kind of person who could gather secrets without raising suspicion. I want to meet her. Bring her to the council meeting this morning. If she has intelligence about the conspiracy, the council needs to hear it. Roderick shifted his weight, the movement of a man preparing to deliver unwelcome news. Your Majesty, she specifically requested to remain anonymous. If the conspirators learn she is investigating, her life becomes worth less than a candle in a storm. Then the council will believe her intelligence comes from you. Marcus straightened, feeling the familiar weight of command settling across his shoulders like armor. But I will speak with her privately first. If my own nobles are betraying me to Valdaria, I need to know who and how and why, and I need to know before they realize we know. The general nodded slowly, respect and concern warring in his weathered features. I will arrange it, Your Majesty. But Marcus, this is dangerous ground. Your father's approach to suspected traitors was swift and brutal. Your approach has been merciful and patient. This situation may require something between those extremes. Marcus turned back to the maps, studying the clean lines that represented messy reality. Find me the traitors, General. I will decide what mercy they deserve. Roderick departed with a soldier's economy of movement, leaving Marcus alone again with maps and memories and the growing certainty that everything he had built through careful diplomacy was about to be tested in fire. The sun rose slowly, painting the stone walls gold and red. He did not move from the maps. Could not move. Because moving forward meant choosing between the king his father had been and the king he was trying to become. The door opened again. Marcus turned, expecting Roderick, and found himself facing a young woman in the simple gray dress of a castle archivist. She carried a leather case under one arm and moved with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to be invisible. Your Majesty. Her voice was quiet but steady. I am Lady Elena Ashford. General Stoneheart said you wished to see me. Marcus studied her with the attention his father had taught him to give potential threats. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, intelligent eyes that met his gaze for exactly the appropriate duration before deferring. No jewelry beyond a simple pendant. Hands that showed ink stains and calluses, the marks of someone who worked rather than merely supervised work. General Stoneheart tells me you have been investigating a conspiracy against the crown. Marcus kept his voice level. He also tells me you wish to remain anonymous in this investigation. I am trying to understand why my own people are betraying me to Valdaria, and you are trying to stay hidden. Those goals seem contradictory. Elena set the leather case on the table with careful precision. My father used to say that the best intelligence comes from operatives the enemy does not know exist. If the conspirators learn I am investigating them, they will either kill me or feed me false information. If they believe I am merely a minor noble's daughter, cataloging old documents, they continue operating openly enough for me to track their communications. Logical. Coldly practical. His father would have approved of the reasoning even while dismissing her gender as a weakness. Marcus found himself curious despite the urgency of invasion and betrayal pressing on his attention. What have you discovered? Elena opened the case and extracted several documents, spreading them across the maps with the confidence of someone who understood the geography of power. These are correspondence patterns between Duke Aldrich Ravencross and known Valdarian agents. Coded, but my father taught me the cipher keys before he died. This one discusses garrison deployments at the northern fortresses. This one, 3 weeks ago, confirms that the Thornpass garrison will be operating at half strength during the Festival of Winter's End, which falls exactly when your scouts predict the Valdarian invasion will occur. Marcus felt cold certainty replacing speculation. Duke Aldrich was his uncle, his father's younger brother, the man who had stood beside Roland in a dozen campaigns and had mentored Marcus through the early years of his reign when grief and inexperience had made every decision feel impossible. "Is it only my uncle?" Marcus heard the strain in his own voice. Elena's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy. "No, Your Majesty. I believe Duke Aldrich is coordinating several noble houses and at least one senior military commander. The communications suggest Beta Commander Garrett Blackwood is involved, though his role is unclear. He may be conspiring willingly, or he may be compromised somehow." Garrett. The name hit harder than Marcus expected. His childhood friend, the warrior who had stood at his side during the early border conflicts of his reign, the man Marcus had promoted to Beta Commander because competence and loyalty had seemed inseparable. "The wedding." Marcus looked up sharply. "Commander Blackwood marries Lady Vivian Ashford in 3 days. Your sister." Elena's carefully neutral expression cracked slightly. "Yes, Your Majesty. I discovered the conspiracy while investigating my sister's sudden engagement to a man well above our family station. Garrett courted her quickly, proposed after only 6 weeks. It seemed romantic until I started decoding the correspondence between Duke Aldrich and the Valdarian agents. The wedding date was specifically chosen. During the ceremony, while the court celebrates and security is focused on festivities, the Valdarian forces will strike." She paused, and Marcus saw genuine pain cross her features before she controlled it. "There is something else, Your Majesty. Something that troubles me more personally. I found reference in one of Aldrich's letters to a plan for the wedding feast. The phrase used was, 'eliminate the obstacle.' I believe they may attempt to poison you during the celebration, when suspicion would fall on foreign agents or random tragedy rather than internal conspiracy." Marcus felt ice in his veins. They would use a wedding to murder their king. His father's paranoia suddenly seemed less like madness and more like survival instinct honed through bitter experience. "Does your sister know?" He asked the question gently. Elena's voice went very quiet. "I do not believe so. Vivian is ambitious but not treasonous. She sees an opportunity to elevate our family through marriage to a war hero. She does not see that she is being used as cover for an invasion and possibly an assassination that will kill thousands of our people." The words hung between them, heavy with implications. Marcus could arrest Garrett now, cancel the wedding, expose the conspiracy, and watch his kingdom tear itself apart from within, while Valdaria invaded from without. Or he could play the game his enemies thought he was too weak to understand. He made his decision with the kind of certainty that felt like falling. "The wedding will proceed as planned." Marcus spoke carefully, watching Elena's face for reaction. "Your sister will marry Commander Blackwood. The court will celebrate, and I will use that celebration to prove to Duke Aldrich and Duke Stefan and everyone who doubts me that mercy and strength are not contradictory. But I will not drink the wine they prepare for me." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "Your Majesty, if you allow the wedding to proceed, you give the conspirators exactly what they want. Cover for their preparations, positioning for their coup, credibility with the nobles who doubt you." "Lady Elena." He met her gaze directly. "I am not my father. I do not rule through fear. But that does not make me weak. It makes me dangerous in ways they have not yet learned to recognize. The wedding will proceed, and during that wedding, I will teach everyone watching a lesson about the difference between weakness and wisdom." The small council chamber filled slowly with nobles who wore their importance like armor. Marcus watched them gather with detached attention, cataloging loyalties and resentments, noting who stood close to Duke Aldrich and who maintained careful distance. His uncle entered last, as befit his status as the king's closest living relative and most senior military advisor. 60 years old but still moving like the warrior he had been, Aldrich Ravencross commanded attention through sheer presence. "Nephew." Aldrich's greeting carried warmth that might have been genuine or might have been practiced affection, disguising treachery. "I trust you slept well as any king sleeps when invasion threatens his borders." Marcus gestured to the maps that General Roderick had spread across the council table. "We have intelligence that Valdaria plans to strike within 10 days, possibly during the Festival of Winter's End when our attention is divided." Aldrich studied the maps with the eye of a veteran who had fought along those borders. A bold move by Duke Stefan. Your father would have already been riding north with the full army, ready to meet them in the field before they could coordinate their assault. The criticism was subtle but unmistakable. "My father started 3 wars during his reign. I have kept peace for 8 years. Perhaps there is wisdom in attempting to understand enemy motivations before resorting to bloodshed." Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. "Peace purchased through weakness invites future aggression." Lord Chancellor Edmund Vale spoke carefully. "Duke Stefan tests you because he believes you lack your father's resolve." Aldrich nodded agreement. "Send the army north. Fortify Thorn Pass. Let the Valdarians see that we are prepared to defend our borders with the same ferocity that King Roland showed." Marcus felt the familiar pressure of expectations pressing down. General Stoneheart cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, if I may. We have received additional intelligence suggesting the Valdarian strategy may be more complex than simple invasion. There are indications of coordination with internal forces." Aldrich's expression did not change, but Marcus watched for the small signs, the slight tension around the eyes, the fractional pause before responding. "Tell me you are not suggesting treachery within our own ranks, General." "That kind of paranoia destroyed my brother's final years. It did not destroy him. A Valdarian blade destroyed him." Marcus spoke quietly. "I am not my father, Duke Aldrich. I do not see enemies in every shadow, but I am also not blind to the possibility that Duke Stefan has found allies among those who believe my approach to kingship endangers the realm." The chamber went very still. "If there are traitors among us, they must be found and dealt with." Aldrich's voice carried absolute conviction. "Your father would have purged the entire court until the guilty were exposed. I trust you will be equally thorough." "I will be thorough, but I will not be my father." Marcus met his uncle's gaze directly. "I will not execute men on suspicion. I will not rule through terror. I will find the truth, and I will act on evidence rather than fear." Aldrich smiled slightly, the expression of a man who had just confirmed his suspicions. "That is indeed the difference, Your Majesty. I pray it is a difference that keeps the kingdom safe, rather than one that gets us all killed." The council meeting dissolved into tactical discussions. When the nobles finally departed, General Roderick remained behind with Marcus. Elena had been right to stay hidden. Several of those men are certainly involved in the conspiracy. Marcus walked to the window, looking down at the courtyard where soldiers drilled. "Which ones? How many? Am I surrounded by enemies wearing the faces of allies?" Roderick joined him at the window. "Your father saw enemies everywhere and created them through his suspicion. You see allies everywhere and create vulnerability through your trust. The truth lies somewhere between those extremes. Tell me honestly, General, am I strong enough to be king?" The question hung between them, raw and honest, the kind of vulnerability that Roland would have called suicide. Roderick was quiet for a long moment. "Your father was the strongest man I ever knew. He was also the most miserable. He won every battle and lost everything that made victory meaningful. He died alone, in pain, with no one to mourn him except a son he had spent 24 years teaching to hide every human feeling." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. He did not weep now, but he allowed himself to feel the weight of what Roderick's words offered. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until Valdaria invaded, and the conspiracy revealed itself, and everything he had built through careful diplomacy was tested. 3 days to decide whether mercy was wisdom or weakness. Marcus spent those 3 days preparing for war while appearing to prepare for celebration. He authorized the wedding festivities with public enthusiasm while privately repositioning garrison deployments. He attended rehearsals for the ceremony while Elena decoded more intercepted correspondence. He smiled and congratulated Commander Garrett Blackwood while knowing that his childhood friend believed him too weak to deserve the crown. The night before the wedding, Marcus stood alone in his private chambers, sleepless and haunted. The formal uniform of kingship hung ready for morning, black and silver, his father's colors. He thought about Elena Ashford, the minor noble's daughter who moved through the castle like a ghost, gathering intelligence that could save or destroy the kingdom. He thought about Garrett, the friend who had become a conspirator because mercy looked like weakness from the outside. Most of all, he thought about his father, bleeding out over 3 days while refusing to show pain, while explaining with his final breaths that love was poison and mercy was suicide. Perhaps Roland had been right. Perhaps tomorrow would prove that wisdom was just another word for weakness. But Marcus had spent years refusing that inheritance, trying to prove that strength and compassion were not contradictory, that a king could rule without terror. Tomorrow he would learn whether he had been right. The cathedral bells began ringing at dawn. Marcus dressed in his formal uniform with movements that felt like ritual, like armor, like preparation for battle rather than celebration. The silver crown his father had worn felt heavier than usual. General Roderick met him at the castle gates with an escort of 20 guards in full ceremonial armor. "Your Majesty, everything is positioned as you ordered. The 3rd Regiment stands ready at Thornpass under Captain Millhouse. The city garrison has been reinforced without making the preparations obvious, and Lady Elena will be watching from the archives gallery with signal flags if the Valdarian scouts are spotted approaching." Marcus nodded, his throat tight with the knowledge that lives depended on decisions he had made in the darkness of his war room. They rode through streets lined with citizens celebrating a wedding that none of them understood was cover for treason and invasion. Children threw flowers. Merchants had decorated their shops. Common folk waved and cheered for their king, and Marcus felt the terrible weight of their trust. The cathedral rose before them, ancient stone that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. Marcus dismounted at the great doors, and the crowd's noise faded as he entered the sacred space. The pews were filled with nobles in their finest political alliances, made visible through seating arrangements. Duke Aldrich sat in the place of honor, his expression benevolent, no trace visible of the conspiracy he had orchestrated. Garrett stood at the altar in his dress uniform, every inch the war hero. Marcus caught his eye across the cathedral, and for just a moment saw confusion flicker across his friend's face, as if Garrett had suddenly realized that Marcus knew. The ceremony began with traditional words about unity and strength. Marcus barely heard them. His attention was divided between watching the nobles for signs of coordination, monitoring the streets beyond the windows for dust clouds that would signal approaching forces, and thinking about Elena Ashford hidden in the archives gallery, ready to signal if the trap was about to be sprung. Lady Vivian entered on her father's arm, beautiful in white silk. She smiled at Garrett with genuine love, and Marcus felt sick understanding that sometimes the cruelest betrayals were the ones that looked like romance. The priest asked for objections. The traditional pause. The nobles watched with careful attention. Marcus stood. The cathedral went utterly still. Every eye turned to him. Garrett's hand moved instinctively toward his sword, then stopped. Vivian's face went pale. Duke Aldrich's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes blazed. "Your Majesty." The priest's voice trembled slightly. "Do you have lawful impediment to this union?" Marcus walked forward slowly, his boots echoing on stone floors. He had rehearsed this moment a dozen different ways, imagined speeches about justice and betrayal. But now, the words that came were simpler and more devastating than any prepared speech. "I have received intelligence that Commander Blackwood is involved in a conspiracy to facilitate Valdarian invasion during this ceremony. That Duke Aldrich Ravencross has been coordinating with enemy forces to undermine our border defenses. That this wedding, this celebration, this gathering of our kingdom's nobility is designed to provide cover for treason that will cost thousands of lives." The cathedral erupted, nobles shouting denials and demands for proof, guards moving to defensive positions. Garrett's hand now firmly on his sword hilt, Vivian looking between her groom and her king with dawning horror. Duke Aldrich standing slowly, his expression finally showing the calculation beneath the benevolence. "This is madness!" Aldrich's voice cut through the chaos. "Your Majesty, I understand that invasion makes us all suspicious, but these accusations are paranoid fantasy." Marcus reached into his uniform and withdrew the documents Elena had decoded, holding them high enough for the nearest nobles to see the Valdarian seals. These are intercepted communications between Duke Aldrich and Duke Stefan Valdarian. They discuss garrison deployments, timing of attacks, the planned coup after I failed to adequately respond to invasion. They reference Commander Blackwood as a cooperative element, and they specifically mention using this wedding as distraction. Garrett moved then, not toward Marcus, but toward the documents. He studied the papers for a long moment while the cathedral held its breath. Then his face crumpled, not with guilt, but with understanding. "These are real." His voice was rough. "Your Majesty, I swear on my honor, I knew nothing of communications with Valdaria. Duke Aldrich approached me months ago, yes. He said you were too focused on diplomacy, that the kingdom needed stronger leadership, that nobles were considering demanding your abdication. He asked if I would accept the crown if the council offered it. And you said yes. I said I would consider it." Garrett met his eyes directly. "I believed you were leading us toward weakness. But this," he gestured at the documents, "coordinating with Valdaria, planning invasion during my wedding, using Vivian as cover. I never agreed to treason." The distinction mattered. The difference between political conspiracy and actual treason. Marcus watched Garrett process that difference, watched his childhood friend realize he had been played. "Duke Aldrich." Marcus turned to his uncle with absolute control. "Do you deny writing these communications?" His uncle stood with the dignity of a man who had spent 60 years learning to hide truth beneath layers of noble bearing. "I deny nothing. Yes, I have corresponded with Duke Stefan. Yes, I believe you are endangering this kingdom through weakness. Yes, I have been working to find alternative leadership before your diplomacy gets us all conquered. And yes, I timed these actions to coincide with the wedding because distraction serves strategy. But I have not betrayed our kingdom. I have been trying to save it from a king who mistakes peace for strength." The cathedral went silent again. Marcus felt the moment like pressure in his chest, understanding that what he did next would define not just his reign, but his entire understanding of what kingship meant. His father would have ordered immediate execution. That was strength. That was how you kept a kingdom safe. But Marcus had spent years trying to prove there was another way, demonstrating that mercy could coexist with strength, that wisdom was not weakness. The great doors of the cathedral burst open. Captain Milhouse entered at a run, his armor dust covered. "Your Majesty, Valdarian forces at Thorn Pass, 3,000 strong as intelligence predicted, but they are not attacking the pass." Marcus felt ice in his veins. "Where?" "Silverpine Woods, Your Majesty. 2,000 mountain infantry moving through terrain we thought impassable. They will reach the capital by nightfall if unopposed." The nobles erupted again, panic replacing political intrigue. Duke Aldrich's face showed genuine shock, suggesting that at least this part of the Valdarian strategy had not been shared with him. Garrett was already moving toward the door, his officer training taking over. Marcus made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Commander Blackwood," his voice cut through chaos, "take 500 light infantry, march for Silverpine immediately. Engage and delay the Valdarian forces until I can bring the cavalry as reinforcement." Garrett turned back, surprise clear on his face. "Your Majesty, I am under suspicion of treason. You are sending me to command your troops? I am sending the best military officer I have to face an enemy that threatens our kingdom." Marcus met his friend's eyes. "Whatever our political differences, I trust your honor as a warrior. Will you defend this kingdom or prove my uncle's conspiracy?" The question hung between them. Garrett straightened, came to attention, saluted with the precision of a career soldier. "I will defend our kingdom, my king. And when this is done, we will have words about who deserves to rule it. Then go." Marcus turned to the assembled nobles. "Anyone capable of fighting, arm yourselves. Anyone not capable, take shelter in the lower chambers. General Stoneheart, mobilize the city garrison. Duke Aldrich, you will remain here under guard until I return." His uncle met his gaze with something that might have been respect. "If you do not return, nephew, history will record that I was right about your weakness." Marcus smiled without humor. "History will record that I tried to be better than my father. Whether that makes me weak or wise, the next few hours will determine." He strode from the cathedral into chaos. Elena appeared at his side, her archivist's dress exchanged for practical traveling clothes, a crossbow slung over her shoulder. "Your Majesty, I am coming with you." "Lady Elena, this is a battlefield." Her eyes flashed. "My father taught me to fight before he taught me to decode messages, and I know Valdarian military tactics. You need every advantage." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not a minor noble's daughter, but a woman who had spent 3 years learning to be invisible while gathering the courage to save a kingdom that barely knew she existed.
Can you ride? Better than most of your cavalry?
Then let's go teach Duke Stefan Valdarian what happens when he mistakes mercy for weakness. The road to Silverpine Woods cut through terrain that had witnessed centuries of conflict, old battlefields where Marcus's ancestors had bled and conquered and been forgotten by everyone except the earth that held their bones. 300 cavalry rode behind him, heavy horse bred for war, men who had trained their entire lives for moments like this, when strategy gave way to violence, and the only currency that mattered was courage measured in steel and blood. Elena rode beside Marcus, her presence drawing stares from soldiers who had never seen a woman in their formation. She sat her horse like someone who had grown up riding, the practical seat of someone who understood that a horse was a partner in survival rather than a symbol of status. General Roderick commanded the rear guard, his weathered face grim with the knowledge that they were riding into terrain that favored ambush, that 2,000 Valdarian mountain infantry dug into forest could bleed 300 cavalry white before the fight truly began. But orders were orders, and Marcus had given them with the certainty of a king who had finally chosen action over calculation. The forest appeared on the horizon like a dark promise, ancient pines that had stood when his kingdom was young. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs, adrenaline and fear mixing into something that might have been excitement if the stakes were not measured in lives. Garrett's advance force had already engaged. The sound of combat drifted through the afternoon air, distant screams and the clash of steel on steel. Marcus raised his hand, signaling halt, and the cavalry column stopped with the discipline of soldiers who understood that rushed decisions killed more men than enemy blades. "Your Majesty." Roderick moved his horse alongside Marcus. "Commander Blackwood engaged 2 hours ago, according to the scouts. He is surrounded, taking heavy casualties. If we charge in blindly, we lose the cavalry and any chance of stopping the main Valdarian force from reaching the capital." Marcus studied the forest edge, trying to see through trees to the tactical situation beyond, trying to think strategically rather than merely reacting to crisis. The prospect of losing Garrett, of failing to protect what they had built together, despite conspiracy and betrayal, unlocked something primal in his fighting spirit. "We split the formation." Marcus made his decision. "General Roderick, take 200 cavalry north through the deer trails. Circle behind the Valdarian position. Give me 30 minutes, then hit them from the rear." "And you, Your Majesty?" "I take 100 cavalry straight through the center. Break their line, reach Commander Blackwood, extract his forces before they are completely overrun." Roderick's face showed the expression of a man watching his king commit suicide through noble intention. "Your Majesty, that is exactly what they expect. The Valdarians will have prepared for frontal assault. Then I will risk 100 to save 500. Marcus met the general's eyes. "That is what my reign has been about, choosing differently than my father would have chosen." Elena spoke quietly. "Your Majesty, there is a third option. The Valdarian mountain infantry are arranged in a crescent formation, strongest at the center, where they expect your frontal assault, weakest at the eastern flank, where the terrain grows rocky, and they believe cavalry cannot operate effectively. If we hit that flank with 50 mounted archers firing from elevation, we collapse their line without the casualties of frontal assault." Both men turned to stare at her. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, the possibility that wisdom and strength were not contradictory. "Lady Elena." Roderick's voice carried respect and doubt in equal measure. "How do you know their formation?" "My father collected intelligence on every kingdom within striking distance of our borders. The Valdarian Mountain Corps uses the same tactical formations they developed during the northern campaigns 40 years ago. Crescent shape, heavy center, weak flanks, designed to absorb frontal assault and then collapse inward like a trap." Marcus felt certainty settling into place. "We do it Lady Elena's way. Captain Milhouse, take 50 mounted archers and Lady Elena to the eastern ridge. Wait for General Roderick's rear assault, then hit the Valdarian flank with everything you have. The rest of you, with me. We push through the center, not to break them, but to keep them focused forward while the real attacks come from positions they are not watching." The officers saluted and wheeled their horses, the cavalry splitting into 3 groups with practiced efficiency. Elena lingered for a moment, her eyes meeting Marcus's with something that might have been concern. "Do not die, Your Majesty." Her voice was steady. "The kingdom needs you alive more than it needs you heroic."
I will try to manage both. Marcus allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Elena returned the smile, then turned her horse and galloped toward the eastern approach, her archers following like shadows. Marcus signaled his remaining cavalry forward. They moved through the forest edge at a trot, trees closing around them like the walls of a tunnel. The sounds of combat grew louder. Screams, the wet sounds of blades finding flesh, the desperate shouts of men who knew they were dying and wanted their deaths to matter. The Valdarian position appeared suddenly through the trees, exactly as Elena had described. 2,000 mountain infantry arranged in a crescent, their heavy armor and polearms perfect for close-quarters fighting. At the center of their formation, surrounded and taking catastrophic casualties, Garrett's 500 light infantry fought with the desperation of men who understood that surrender was not an option. Marcus could see Garrett at the heart of the fighting, his sword red to the hilt, his dress uniform shredded and blood-stained, his face a mask of fury and determination. The Beta commander fought with violent certainty, with no hesitation, no mercy, just brutal efficiency. For just an instant, Marcus envied that certainty. Then he remembered that he had committed to a different path, to proving that kings could rule without terror, that strength did not require brutality. "For the king!" Marcus raised his sword and kicked his horse into a gallop. "For honor! For the kingdom that chooses wisdom over violence!" The cavalry charge hit the Valdarian center like a hammer striking stone. Horses screaming, men dying, the impact of armored bodies colliding with enough force to shatter bones and tear flesh. Marcus fought from horseback with the spear his father had taught him to wield, the weapon that kept enemies at distance while delivering death with mechanical precision. He killed a Valdarian officer whose face he would remember forever, young and terrified and brave. Marcus had no answer for why kings sent young men to kill each other over borders that were just lines on maps. The cavalry pushed deeper, opening a corridor through sheer violence and momentum. Garrett saw them coming and rallied his remaining infantry, maybe 300 still standing from the original 500. "Your Majesty!" Garrett's voice carried over the chaos. "I did not expect you to come. I did not expect you to need saving." Marcus extended his spear to fend off a Valdarian soldier. "We extract your forces now, then regroup." The Valdarians pressed harder. Marcus felt the formation starting to collapse around him, cavalry horses stumbling over bodies and broken ground. Then the arrows came. 50 mounted archers firing from elevated positions on the eastern ridge, exactly as Elena had planned. The Valdarian flank collapsed under precision fire that targeted officers and formation anchors. The mountain infantry tried to reorient, but reorientation meant exposing their flanks to Marcus's cavalry and Garrett's infantry. And then General Roderick's 200 cavalry hit from the north, the rear assault that completed the tactical collapse. The Valdarian ambush became a killing ground where 2,000 infantry discovered that forests which favored their defensive positions also prevented retreat. The battle lasted another hour, brutal and close. Marcus fought through it with the detached precision training demanded. Killing because not killing meant being killed. Surviving because a kingdom needed him to survive more than it needed him to be heroic. When the Valdarian commander finally signaled retreat, nearly 800 of his 2,000 soldiers lay dead or dying. Garrett's 500 light infantry had been reduced to 250. Marcus's cavalry had lost 40 men. Marcus dismounted among the bodies, his legs shaking from exhaustion and the weight of understanding that he had ordered this, that every corpse represented a choice he had made. Garrett found him standing over a dead Valdarian soldier who could not have been older than 20, his face peaceful in death. "Your Majesty." Garrett's voice was rough, exhausted. "Thank you for coming, for saving us, for proving that I was wrong about you." Marcus did not turn. "Commander, get your men medical attention. We camp here tonight, then march for the capital at dawn. Duke Stefan will have received word that his ambush failed." "And Duke Aldrich? What happens to him?" "That depends on what I find when I return." Marcus finally turned to meet Garrett's eyes. "You said when this was over, we would have words about who deserves to rule. I am ready for those words now, if you are." Garrett was silent for a long moment. Then he went to one knee in the blood-soaked earth, his sword laid across his palms. "Your Majesty, I questioned your strength. I believed peace made you weak. I thought the kingdom needed a warrior king like your father. But your father would have sacrificed my 500 men to preserve strategic advantage. You risked your own life to save us. That is not weakness. That is a different kind of strength." the kind I did not understand until I watched you fight. Rise, Commander. Marcus extended his hand, pulling Garrett to his feet. My father ruled through fear. I am trying to rule through something else. I do not yet have a name for it, but I think it involves trusting the men who question me as much as the men who obey me. That is dangerous trust, Your Majesty. All trust is dangerous. That is what makes it trust. The camp that night was subdued. Marcus walked among the soldiers, learning names, speaking to the wounded, making certain that every man understood that their king saw them as human beings rather than strategic assets. Elena found him as the sun set, her archers settled, and her own minor wounds bandaged. Your Majesty, scouts report that Duke Stefan has withdrawn his main force back across the border. The ambush was his primary strategy. Now that it has failed, he lacks the strength to push through Thorn Pass. So we won. Marcus heard the flatness in his own voice. We defeated the invasion, exposed the conspiracy, saved the kingdom. Why does it feel incomplete? Elena studied him with those intelligent eyes that saw too much. Because you count the dead as losses rather than acceptable casualties. Because you remember their faces instead of just their numbers. Because you are trying to be a different kind of king than your father was. Does that make me weak or wise? I think it makes you human, and I think humanity in a king is rarer and more valuable than strength. Marcus looked at her, this minor noble's daughter who had saved his life with tactical insight and fought beside his cavalry. Lady Elena, when we return to the capital, I am going to offer you the position of Master of Whispers, your father's old position. Your Majesty, the council will never accept me in that role. The council will accept my appointments, or they will find themselves replaced. Marcus felt certainty settling into his chest. I have spent years trying to be a better king than my father. Perhaps that means surrounding myself with people who see the world differently. Elena bowed. I accept, Your Majesty, and I will try to deserve your trust. You already have. 3 times today, you saved lives through intelligence rather than violence. That is exactly the kind of counsel I need. The march back to the capital took 2 days. Marcus rode at the head of the column beside Garrett and General Roderick, 3 men who represented different visions of leadership. Duke Aldrich remained under guard in the castle, his conspiracy exposed, but his fate undecided. Execute him for treason and prove that mercy had limits. Exile him and risk appearing weak. Find some middle path and risk satisfying no one. His father would have known immediately what to do. Roland would have had Aldrich executed the moment the conspiracy was revealed. They reached the capital as afternoon sun painted the castle walls gold. Citizens lined the streets, cheering for the returning army, celebrating victory over invasion that most of them had not even known was happening. Marcus acknowledged their cheers while his mind worked through the impossible problem waiting in the throne room. The council had assembled. Marcus entered in his battle-stained uniform, deliberately choosing not to clean up, wanting them to see that their king had bled alongside his soldiers. Duke Aldrich stood in the center of the room, still under guard but maintaining dignity. His face showed no fear, no regret, just calm certainty. Nephew, Aldrich's voice carried across the chamber. I trust the Valdarian invasion has been repelled? The ambush in Silverpine was defeated. Duke Stefan has withdrawn across the border. The kingdom is secure. Marcus took his seat on the throne. Then you have won, and I have lost. Simple enough. I suppose you will execute me now for treason. Your father certainly would have. My father would have executed you the moment the conspiracy was revealed. Marcus kept his voice level. I am not my father. No, you are not, which is precisely why I conspired against you. Aldrich's expression showed no apology. I love this kingdom, Marcus. I watched your father build it through strength and fear, and I watched you spend years dismantling his legacy, replacing certainty with negotiation, replacing fear with trust. Uncle, you coordinated with Valdarian forces to facilitate an invasion that killed hundreds of our soldiers. How is that love? Aldrich met his gaze directly. Because I was willing to risk everything, including my life and your hatred, to save this kingdom from a king whose kindness will get us all killed. That is love, Marcus. The council watched in silence. Marcus felt the weight of decision pressing down. Duke Aldrich Ravencross. Marcus spoke with the formal cadence of royal judgment. You are guilty of conspiracy, of coordinating with enemy forces, of actions that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of loyal soldiers. The traditional punishment for treason is execution. Aldrich straightened, preparing to die with dignity. "But I am not my father," Marcus continued, "and I do not believe that executing you serves the kingdom as well as a different sentence. You conspired because you believed my mercy was weakness. You were wrong. We defeated the invasion. We exposed the conspiracy. We proved that a king can rule through wisdom rather than terror."
"Then what is my punishment, Your Majesty?"
"Life." Marcus let the words settle.
"You will live, uncle. You will live and watch me continue to rule through the mercy you despise. You will live and see whether my approach strengthens or weakens this kingdom. You are stripped of your title as Duke. You are exiled from the capital and forbidden to hold military or political office. You will retire to your family estates and live out your days knowing that the nephew you tried to depose showed you the mercy you believed was weakness."
Aldrich's face showed something complex. Not quite gratitude, not quite resentment. "You are making a mistake, nephew. Kindness to enemies creates future enemies. Perhaps, or perhaps my father's cruelty created enemies, where kindness would have created allies." Marcus stood from the throne. "We will find out together, uncle. You will live to see whether my kingship survives or fails." The guards escorted Aldrich from the throne room. The nobles dispersed. Marcus remained standing, feeling the weight of his choice settling into his bones. General Roderick approached slowly.
"Your Majesty, I hope you know what you are doing."
"I have no idea what I am doing, General."
Marcus allowed himself the luxury of honesty. "I am trying to be better than my father. Whether that makes me wise or foolish, history will decide."
The weeks following the failed invasion were strange, a return to ordinary business, while fundamental questions about kingship remained unresolved. Marcus threw himself into reconstruction, authorizing payments to families of soldiers killed, overseeing fortification improvements, managing diplomatic correspondence with Duke Stefan that would either prevent future wars or merely postpone them. Elena proved invaluable. Her intelligence network providing insights the traditional Master of Whispers had never managed. Commander Garrett resumed his duties with renewed dedication, the conspiracy having taught him that questioning methods was different from betraying principles. 2 months after Silverpine, on a morning when winter still held the kingdom, Marcus stood in his private study reading the latest intelligence reports. Elena entered with papers that carried the urgency of crisis.
"Your Majesty?"
Her voice was careful.
"I have intercepted communications that suggest Duke Stefan is not finished with us. He is corresponding with the Vorgath Empire, offering them trade concessions in exchange for military support against our kingdom."
The Vorgath Empire. Marcus felt cold certainty. If Valdaria allied with Vorgath, the threat became existential. "Show me everything you have." Elena spread documents across his desk, decoded correspondence that revealed Duke Stefan's desperation. The pattern was clear. Stefan had gambled on the Silverpine ambush and lost. Now he was seeking more powerful allies. "This changes everything." Marcus studied the documents. "If Vorgath enters the conflict, we cannot defend against them militarily. We would need allies of our own, or we would need to prevent the alliance from forming." Elena met his eyes. "Your Majesty, Duke Stefan is traveling to the Vorgath capital in 3 weeks to finalize the treaty. If something were to happen during that journey, the timeline for alliance formation would be disrupted." "You are suggesting assassination." "I am suggesting that sometimes preventing war requires actions that peacetime morality would condemn." Elena's voice remained steady. "Your father would not have hesitated." "And what would you have me do, Lady Elena?" She hesitated. "I would have you survive, Your Majesty. I would have you protect this kingdom using whatever tools are necessary." Marcus turned to the window, looking out over his capital. His father's ghost whispered that Elena was right, that survival mattered more than moral purity. But Marcus had spent years trying to prove there was a different way, demonstrating that strength and mercy were not contradictory, that wisdom sometimes required restraint rather than action. "No." Marcus spoke quietly but with absolute certainty. "We will not assassinate Duke Stefan. We will not become the kind of kingdom that murders its enemies in the dark. We will find another way." "Your Majesty, there may not be another way." "Then we find it anyway." Marcus turned to face her. "Gather intelligence on the Vorgath delegation. Find out what they actually want, whether there are fissures we can exploit, and send word to Duke Stefan that I request a personal meeting to discuss permanent peace." Elena's eyes widened. "You want to negotiate with the man who just tried to invade us?" I want to show him that this kingdom is strong enough to offer peace from a position of strength." Marcus felt certainty settling. What if instead of proving I can be as brutal as my father, I prove that mercy is actually a more sophisticated form of strength? And if he refuses? Then we will know that diplomacy has limits, and we will prepare accordingly. But I will not order assassination without exhausting every alternative. Elena studied him for a long moment. Then she bowed. "I will arrange the intelligence gathering, Your Majesty, and I will include information about Duke Stefan's family in my report. He has a daughter, Lady Cassandra, who serves as his chief diplomatic advisor. She is said to be intelligent and pragmatic. If anyone can influence his decision toward peace, it would be her." Marcus filed that information away. A daughter who might understand what her father's alliance with Vorgath would cost Valdaria in the long term. Another potential avenue toward peace that violence could never achieve. Elena departed, leaving Marcus alone with decisions that would determine whether years of choosing mercy over brutality had been wisdom or just prolonged suicide. He had defeated one invasion, prevented one conspiracy, proven once that a kingdom could be strong without being brutal. Now he would learn whether that proof was sufficient, or whether his father's approach had been the only approach that actually worked in a world where violence was currency and mercy was just another word for weakness, waiting to be exploited. But for the first time since taking the crown, Marcus felt something beyond mere hope. He felt certainty that there were paths to peace that required more courage than war, that choosing wisely was harder than choosing violently, and that the kingdom he was building through patient choices might prove more durable than anything his father had constructed through fear. The journey ahead would test everything he believed about leadership and mercy and the possibility of being strong without being brutal. But he would face that test with partners who shared his vision, with advisors who understood that wisdom was harder than violence, with the growing confidence that different did not mean weak. His father's way had kept the kingdom safe through terror. Marcus's way would prove whether safety purchased through wisdom was more sustainable than safety purchased through blood. 3 weeks to prepare for the meeting with Duke Stefan. 3 weeks to gather intelligence and build strategy and convince a grieving father that peace served his daughter's future better than alliance with an empire that would consume Valdaria slowly. 3 weeks to prove that mercy was strength, that partnership was power, that kings could rule through wisdom rather than repeating the cycles of violence that had defined kingdoms for generations. Marcus returned to his maps, but this time they looked different. Not clean lines marking territories to defend, but possibilities for connection, for alliance, for building something better than the endless cycle of war and temporary peace that history suggested was inevitable. Perhaps it was inevitable, or perhaps one king choosing differently was enough to begin changing the pattern. He would find out soon enough. The journey to the Valdarian border took 5 days through terrain that remembered war better than peace. Old battlefields where Marcus's father had killed and conquered and left scars that time had softened but never erased. 20 guards rode with him, elite soldiers who understood that diplomatic missions could turn violent with less warning than formal battles. Elena insisted on accompanying him despite his protests, arguing that understanding Duke Stefan's true intentions meant observing his expressions and the small tells that written correspondence could never capture. Garrett rode beside her, having appointed himself responsible for the king's physical safety with the zealous dedication of someone trying to prove loyalty through present service. The Valdarian capital appeared on the 6th day, stone walls that had withstood sieges when Marcus's kingdom was young. Duke Stefan's guards met them at the gates, professional soldiers whose faces showed the wary respect of men who had fought at Silverpine. They were escorted through streets where citizens watched with hostile curiosity. Marcus met their stares with calm acknowledgement, neither aggressive nor apologetic, just a king who understood that reputation was inheritance and changing perception required patience. Duke Stefan received them in a hall designed to intimidate, high ceilings and martial decorations celebrating Valdarian military history. The Duke himself was 60 years old, weathered by campaigns and loss, his face showing the permanent exhaustion of a man who had buried too many sons. "Your Majesty." Stefan's voice was rough, formal. "I confess surprise at your request for this meeting. Most kings send ambassadors rather than risking their own lives in enemy territory. Most kings rule through fear and distance." Marcus kept his voice level. "I prefer direct conversation. honest assessment of mutual interests, the possibility that enemies can become something less hostile if given sufficient reason. Stefan studied him like a veteran studying battlefield terrain. Your father never requested meetings. He sent armies, burned villages, took territory, and held it through brutality that made negotiation unnecessary. My father has been dead for years. His methods died with him. Marcus met the Duke's gaze. I am not here to defend his reign or apologize for his actions. I am here to propose that we can build something better than the cycle of violence that has defined our kingdoms for 3 generations. Pretty words, Your Majesty, but words are cheap. Actions define intentions. Stefan gestured to a servant who brought wine. You defeated my ambush at Silverpine, exposed the conspiracy I had cultivated within your court, demonstrated competence that surprised me. But competence in war does not translate to wisdom in peace. Then let me demonstrate wisdom. Marcus accepted the wine but did not drink immediately. I know you are negotiating with the Vorgath Empire, offering trade concessions in exchange for military support against my kingdom. I am here to offer you something better. Stefan's expression did not change, but Elena had taught Marcus to watch for the small signs, the slight tension, the fractional pause. You have impressive intelligence networks for a kingdom I was told was weak and disorganized. My Master of Whispers is extremely competent. Marcus allowed himself a slight smile. But intelligence gathering is not why I came. I came to ask what you actually want, Duke Stefan, not what you tell your nobles, what you personally want from this conflict. The question hung in the air, too direct for normal diplomatic exchange. Stefan studied Marcus with renewed attention, recognizing something beyond the diplomatic mask. What I want is justice. Stefan's voice went quiet, personal rather than political. Your father killed my son during a raid 12 years ago. Brennan was 19 years old, training to be a commander. He surrendered to your father's forces. Your father executed him anyway, called it battlefield necessity. I have wanted revenge every day since. The words settled into Marcus's chest like stones, heavy with inherited guilt. He could feel Garrett and Elena watching, waiting to see how he would respond. I cannot undo my father's actions. Marcus spoke carefully. I cannot give you back your son. I cannot erase the injustice he suffered. But I can offer you something my father never would have considered. An acknowledgement that he was wrong, that executing a surrendered enemy was murder rather than military necessity, that your grief is legitimate and your anger is justified. Stefan's face showed shock, then suspicion, then something that might have been the beginning of respect. Kings do not admit their fathers were murderers. Perhaps. Or perhaps honesty is the only currency that actually purchases peace. Marcus set down his wine cup. Duke Stefan, I am not my father. I do not rule through terror. I do not execute prisoners. I am trying to build a different kind of kingdom. But I cannot do that alone. I need enemies willing to become something else, partners, allies. At minimum, neighbors who are not actively trying to kill each other. And what would this partnership look like, Your Majesty? Stefan's voice carried caution and curiosity. Marcus took a breath, feeling the weight of the decision he had made during sleepless nights. I am offering a formal alliance between our kingdoms, trade agreements that benefit both our economies, a mutual defense pact against Vorgath expansion, and a public acknowledgement, in writing and witnessed by both our councils, that my father's execution of your son was an act of brutality that I repudiate completely. The hall went silent. Your nobles will revolt. Stefan spoke quietly. Your own people will question whether you have the strength to rule if you publicly declare your father's greatest victories were actually crimes. Perhaps, but I am willing to risk that rebellion to end this cycle of violence. Marcus felt certainty settling. What you are negotiating with Vorgath is not alliance, but surrender. They will consume Valdaria slowly, leaving you the appearance of authority while taking actual control. I am offering genuine partnership between equals. Stefan was silent for a long time, his weathered face working through calculations that were both strategic and emotional. Marcus waited, understanding that rushing this moment would destroy whatever fragile possibility was forming. You are either the wisest king I have ever encountered or the greatest fool. Stefan finally spoke with something that sounded almost like respect. I need time to consider your offer, to consult my advisors, to determine whether trust between our kingdoms is possible after so much blood. Take the time you need. Marcus stood. But know this, Duke Stefan. The Vorgath Emperor does not offer partnerships. He offers conquest disguised as alliance. If you choose his path, Valdaria will cease to exist as an independent kingdom within a generation. If you choose mine, we build something neither of our fathers could have imagined. They departed under watchful eyes. Garrett waited until they were mounted before speaking. Your Majesty, you just offered to publicly repudiate your father's military legacy. The nobles will use that as evidence that you are weak. Let them try. Marcus kept his gaze forward. My father's reputation was built on terror and brutality. If defending that reputation requires me to endorse executing surrendered enemies, then I am happy to be called weak. Elena rode up beside them. Your Majesty, Duke Stefan was calculating whether he could trust you. The public repudiation of your father's actions was brilliant. It demonstrated that you value justice over pride. That is not weakness. That is courage most kings never develop. They camped that night in neutral ground. Marcus stood apart from the camp, watching stars appear, thinking about his father and Duke Stefan and the weight of inherited violence. Elena found him as darkness completed its conquest of daylight. You did well today, Your Majesty. You offered Duke Stefan something no one has offered him in 12 years. Acknowledgement that his grief is legitimate. Whether he accepts your alliance or not, you demonstrated the kind of kingship this world needs. I demonstrated that I am not my father. Marcus heard the exhaustion in his own voice. Whether that is sufficient remains to be seen. Or you will have proven that some choices are worth making regardless of outcome. Elena moved closer. Your father ruled through fear and died alone, unmourned except by a son he spent years teaching to hide every human feeling. You rule through wisdom and have people who genuinely care whether you survive. That is victory, Your Majesty. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, some wall crumbling under words that validated choices he had questioned. Lady Elena, you have served this kingdom with intelligence and courage. I am grateful for your counsel and your loyalty. She studied him with those eyes that saw too much. Thank you, Your Majesty. Serving a king who values intelligence as much as strength has been the honor of my life. They stood together under stars that had witnessed centuries of human conflict. Marcus felt the loneliness of kingship transform into something else, the understanding that leadership did not require complete isolation. The answer from Duke Stefan came 3 days after their return to the capital, delivered by formal ambassador. The letter was written in Stefan's own hand, direct and honest in ways that diplomatic correspondence rarely achieved. The letter explained that Stefan had struggled with the decision Marcus's offer demanded. Revenge had been his companion for 12 years, the driving force that shaped every decision. Abandoning that revenge felt like betraying his son's memory. But the letter continued with brutal honesty about strategic reality. The Vorgath Empire had been demanding concessions that would effectively end Valdarian independence. Stefan's generals had counseled that alliance with Vorgath was suicide through delayed execution. The letter concluded with acceptance. Duke Stefan would agree to alliance with Marcus's kingdom, would sign trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. But he had one additional condition. He wanted Marcus to visit his son's grave, to stand in the place where Brennan was buried and speak words of acknowledgement. Marcus read the letter 3 times, understanding that this was the true price of peace, not political concessions, but the emotional labor of witnessing another man's grief. His father would have refused, calling it weakness. But Marcus had spent years trying to prove that human feeling was strength, that acknowledging pain was the foundation for genuine peace. He traveled to Valdaria again with smaller escort, understanding that trust required accepting vulnerability. Duke Stefan met them at the border, riding without formal entourage, just an old warrior traveling to visit his son's resting place. They rode together through countryside that showed scars of past raids. Stefan spoke little during the journey, his weathered face locked in the expression of a man approaching something that would hurt. The grave was simple, a stone marker in a small cemetery where Valdarian soldiers were buried. Stefan dismounted and stood before the grave with the stillness of someone who had performed this ritual countless times. Marcus dismounted and stood beside him, not speaking, understanding that this moment belonged to Stefan's grief before it could become Marcus's acknowledgement. They stood in silence while wind moved through the cemetery. "Your Majesty," Stefan's voice was rough, "this is my son Brennan. He would have been 31 years old this month. He wanted to be a commander like his father. He was brave and foolish and young enough to believe that surrender was honorable. Your father taught him differently." "Duke Stefan," Marcus spoke carefully, "I never knew your son. I cannot claim to understand your loss, but I can tell you that what my father did was wrong, that executing a surrendered enemy was murder, that your son deserved honor rather than brutality, and that I repudiate completely the philosophy that allowed such injustice." Stefan was silent for a long moment, his face working through emotions that 12 years had not resolved. Then he spoke with exhausted honesty. "I have hated you, Your Majesty, hated you for being Roland's son, for inheriting the crown he wore when he ordered my son's execution. I wanted you to suffer as I have suffered, wanted revenge that would somehow balance scales your father made forever uneven." Marcus said nothing, understanding that Stefan needed to speak this truth before he could move beyond it. "But watching you today," Stefan continued, his voice quieter, "standing here and hearing you acknowledge what your father did, seeing you willing to make yourself vulnerable, I understand something I have been refusing to understand for 12 years. What is that, Duke Stefan? That revenge does not bring back the dead. That hatred is poison I have been drinking while hoping you would die from it, that my son would have wanted me to build something better than just perpetuating the cycle that killed him." Stefan turned to face Marcus directly. "You are not your father, Your Majesty, and I am tired of pretending that punishing you for his crimes is justice." Marcus felt something release in his chest. "I propose an oath, not a treaty, something more personal, a blood oath between our families, that we will end the cycle of violence, that we will build peace worth more than revenge, that we will honor the dead by creating a future they did not get to see." Stefan studied him with the attention a veteran gave to battlefield terrain. "A blood oath requires sacrifice. What are you willing to sacrifice, Your Majesty?" Marcus drew his knife, his father's weapon. He cut his palm without hesitation, blood welling up with sharp clarity. "I sacrifice the right to revenge, for any future wrong your kingdom does to mine. I swear that my first response will be negotiation rather than violence, that I will exhaust every alternative before resorting to military force." Stefan drew his own knife, cutting his palm. He clasped Marcus's hand, their blood mixing. "I sacrifice the right to hatred, for the death of my son and years of grief that followed. I swear that I will build alliance with you based on present actions rather than past grievances, that I will judge your kingship by what you do rather than what your father did." They stood with hands clasped, blood mixing and dripping to the ground beside Brennan's grave, the symbolic merger of kingdoms and families and commitment to building something better. When they released hands, Stefan spoke with exhausted relief. "Your Majesty, I am too old to have more sons, but I have a daughter, Lady Cassandra, intelligent, competent, trained in diplomacy and strategy. If our alliance is to be genuine, perhaps a marriage between our houses would demonstrate commitment that mere treaties cannot match." Marcus felt surprise and something more complex. Royal marriages were political foundation, the merger of families that created incentives for peace. His father had never married for love, but Marcus was not his father. "I would need to meet your daughter before agreeing." Marcus spoke carefully. "Marriage should serve our kingdoms, but I will not treat another human being as mere political transaction. If she and I can build genuine partnership, then yes, a marriage alliance would demonstrate commitment in ways that treaties alone cannot." "She is here." Stefan gestured toward the cemetery entrance where a woman waited beside horses. She wanted to witness the oath, but did not want to intrude. That is very like her, intelligent about when to be present and when to remain apart. The woman approached slowly, moving with confident economy. She was perhaps 28 years old, dark-haired and serious-faced, her eyes showing intelligence. Not decoration, but capability. "Your Majesty," her voice was clear. "I am Lady Cassandra Valdarian. My father has explained your alliance proposal and his suggestion regarding marriage. I want you to know that I support both, not from duty, but from genuine belief that peace between our kingdoms is worth building. Marriage should not be sacrifice." Marcus studied her carefully. "It should be partnership." Cassandra's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. That is an unusual perspective for a king to hold, Your Majesty. Most royal marriages are exactly sacrifice. Most royal marriages are built on my father's model. Marcus spoke quietly. Cold transaction without human consideration. I am trying to build something different. If you and I marry, it will be because we believe we can build genuine partnership, not just because our kingdoms need symbolic unity. I propose this. Cassandra spoke with directness. We spend the next 3 months building our kingdom's alliance, working together on trade agreements and mutual defense, learning whether we can actually function as partners before we commit to marriage. If partnership proves possible, then marriage becomes genuine choice rather than mere duty. Agreed. Marcus felt certainty settling. 3 months to determine whether wisdom and practical politics can align. The return to his capital felt different this time, carrying possibility. Marcus rode with Elena and Garrett, his thoughts divided between strategic implications and personal considerations about Cassandra. Elena rode beside him. She is impressive, Your Majesty. Lady Cassandra. Intelligent, direct, competent. The kind of person who could genuinely be an equal partner. Yes. Marcus heard the uncertainty in his own voice. My father married for political advantage. The marriage produced an heir and nothing else. I do not want to repeat that pattern. Then do not. Elena's voice carried gentle firmness. You have spent years proving you are not your father. Build something different. Partnership that serves both kingdom and heart. It is possible, Your Majesty. The words settled into Marcus's chest like warmth. Perhaps Elena was right. Perhaps the synthesis he had been building could extend beyond military strategy to include personal connections that served both duty and desire. They reached the capital as sunset painted the castle walls gold and red. The throne room was full when he entered. Nobles gathered to hear about the diplomatic mission. He explained the terms simply. The trade agreements and mutual defense pact, the public acknowledgement of his father's injustice, the blood oath sworn beside a grave. The nobles listened with varying expressions. Duke Aldrich would have called this weakness. Marcus spoke into the silence. My uncle would have said that admitting my father's crimes demonstrates that I lack the strength to rule through fear and violence. Perhaps he is right by the standards that my father used. The nobles stirred, uncertain. But I am not trying to be strong by their standards. Marcus continued. I am trying to build a kingdom where strength means wisdom rather than brutality, where power serves protection rather than conquest. If that makes me weak, then I am proudly weak. And I will continue to be weak in exactly this way until someone demonstrates that brutality serves our people better than the peace we have maintained. No one spoke. Lord Chancellor Edmund Vale stood slowly. Your Majesty, this alliance with Valdaria strengthens our position against Vorgath expansion. The Council supports this alliance. Marcus felt tension ease slightly. He had won this battle, but the war to prove his kingship would continue every day he sat the throne. The 3 months that followed transformed both kingdoms through hard daily work of building alliance, negotiating trade terms, teaching soldiers who had been enemies to recognize each other as potential allies. Marcus worked closely with Duke Stefan, discovering wisdom earned through loss. And he worked closely with Cassandra. She possessed intelligence that matched Elena's, diplomatic skill that navigated treacherous situations with grace, and honesty that refused to hide behind courtly manners. She challenged his assumptions, questioned his strategies, demonstrated repeatedly that partnership meant genuine collaboration. They spent hours together reviewing agreements, their conversations ranging beyond politics to philosophy and history. Cassandra had been shaped by her brother's death and her father's grief, understanding that violence poisoned relationships and destroyed possibilities. Marcus found himself looking forward to their meetings, not just for political value, but for personal pleasure of conversation with someone who understood the burden of leadership, while refusing to let that burden crush the human being beneath the crown. 3 months after the blood oath, on a morning when spring was breaking winter's hold, Marcus rode to the border to meet Cassandra for their final negotiation session. She waited for him, her expression serious, but her eyes showing warmth that had not been present during their first encounter. 3 months of partnership had transformed wariness into respect, political arrangement into genuine appreciation. Your Majesty. Cassandra's greeting carried formality. Her expression contradicted. I have reviewed the final alliance terms. Everything appears in order. Our kingdoms will be formally allied by month's end. Excellent. Marcus dismounted. And have you reviewed the other question we were meant to consider? Whether we can build genuine partnership rather than just political marriage. Cassandra's voice was steady. I have considered it carefully. I have watched you lead, seen how you treat your advisors and soldiers, observed how you balance mercy with strength, and I have concluded that you are exactly the kind of king worth serving and exactly the kind of man worth knowing. That sounds like a conclusion. Marcus felt his heart hammering, but it does not sound like an answer to the question of whether genuine partnership is possible between us, because I wanted to hear your conclusion first. Cassandra met his eyes directly. 3 months ago, marriage would have been political necessity. Now it could be something more, but only if you want partnership, rather than just alliance secured through bloodlines. I see you as equal. Marcus spoke with honesty Elena had taught him to value. You are more diplomatic than I am, more patient with noble self-importance, better at navigating court politics. If we marry, I will be gaining a partner who makes me better. Cassandra smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. That is the right answer, Your Majesty. Then I am asking genuinely. Marcus took her hands. Will you marry me, Lady Cassandra? Not because our kingdoms need the alliance, though they do. Not because your father suggested it, though I respect his wisdom. But because 3 months of partnership has convinced me that building a life together would be better than building a kingdom alone. Yes. Cassandra's answer was simple and direct. I will marry you, Marcus Thornhaven, and together we will prove that kingdoms can be strong through wisdom rather than brutality, that peace is harder and more valuable than war, that your father's way was not the only way. They stood together at the border between kingdoms that had been enemies for 3 generations, 2 people choosing to build something better than cycles of violence. The wedding took place 3 months later, attended by both kingdoms' nobility, a ceremony that celebrated not just marriage, but formal alliance. Elena stood as witness. Garrett commanded the honor guard, his loyal service during the months since Silverpine having completed his redemption arc. Duke Stefan gave his daughter away with tears in his eyes, this old warrior who had spent 12 years consumed by grief, finally able to lay down those burdens. He clasped Marcus's hand before the ceremony with the strength of renewed blood oath. Marcus spoke his vows with Cassandra's hands in his, the ancient words about partnership and loyalty taking on meaning beyond mere tradition. These were not just ceremonial promises. They were commitment to continue building the kind of kingdom his father would have called weak, but that Marcus knew was actually the hardest form of strength. When the ceremony ended and celebration began, Marcus stood with his wife on the castle battlements, the place where he had spent so many solitary hours trying to carry the weight of kingship alone. Do you regret it? Cassandra asked quietly. Choosing this path? Building peace through wisdom rather than ruling through fear? Marcus looked out over his capital, the city his father had ruled through terror, and he had ruled through patient diplomacy. He thought about the years of choosing mercy when brutality would have been easier, building alliance when violence would have been faster, proving that kings could rule without terror if they were willing to do the harder work of earning respect. No regrets. Marcus spoke with absolute certainty. My father ruled for decades and died alone, unmourned except by a son he had taught to hide every human feeling. I am standing here with a partner who chose me freely, allies who trust rather than fear me, a kingdom that is stronger through wisdom than it ever was through brutality. That is the only legacy worth leaving. Cassandra leaned against him, their hands intertwined, watching the sun set over kingdoms that would face future challenges together. Marcus finally understood what his father had never learned. Kingship was not about being strong enough to rule alone. It was about being wise enough to build partnerships that made everyone stronger. The crown on his head felt lighter now, shared weight distributed across multiple shoulders. His father's certainty about mercy being weakness had been proven wrong through patient choices and careful diplomacy. Marcus Thornhaven, Alpha King who had chosen mercy over brutality, stood watching sunset paint his kingdom in colors that promised tomorrow, knowing that he had finally proven what years of doubt had questioned. Mercy was not weakness, partnership was not vulnerability, and kings who ruled through wisdom could build something stronger than anything violence could achieve.